What is up as a figure hunter, and today we have the full and final review for the new Suunto vertical. So if you like this review, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. I am actually going to look at this from a little bit of a different angle. We're not going to go through all the specs and every little nuance to it. We're actually just going to boil it down to 7 things that I liked and 8 things that I didn't like in testing and tracking this review for this watch. Basically everything from fundamental, functional aspects that positive or negative down to the minor sort of tidbit complaints and everything in between. And don't take that number of positives or number of negatives to mean anything about how I actually feel about the product, because I will summarize what I think and how I think it compares to others at the very end of this review. I want to remind everybody this has been tested and tracked for CrossFit and high intensity interval training versus running and biking and swimming. So I'm going to look at 0 running and biking and swimming metrics or aspects, or take 0 of those aspects into account when doing the final review for this. So with that, let's dive in and look at the things that I liked first. All right, the first thing I like about this is just the overall design quality. The design, the style, the build, the feel, the weight, all of it, the accent colors, everything about it is it just feels fantastic. Feels just really well built. I do like the band. I like that it has this little nodule clasp so that it just it locks into place. But I love the little ridges on the side. The buttons feel very strong, like they're going to last like 100 years. Super solid. And this backing is what's called a glass fiber reinforced polyamide. It doesn't look like there's a traditional plate. It does not look like this is metal. It looks like this is all the glass fiber reinforced polyamide. And so the only metal is up here top, but because of that, it didn't feel like a plasticky back. It doesn't feel like you have, metal up top and just, cheaper plastic down below. And then the sapphire glass, just again, another touch to the quality of the build. And you can sort of compare just the overall build quality to a Fenix 7X or a Fenix 7. So the Fenix 7X, this is going to be, Suunto vertical is 49 millimeters. This is 51. So you can just sort of see the design differences of how it would look in person. The next thing that stands out to me is the quality of the backlight. I mean, if you just look at each of the backlight on each of the watches around it, the Apex 2 Pro is definitively the dimmest. And even compared to the Fenix 7X at max brightness, you probably can't see it directly on the camera, but it's probably 3 times brighter. Literally at max brightness here on the Suunto vertical, as well as max brightness on the 7X, it is definitively brilliant and definitively bright. The contrast is pretty good, maybe not as good, but the backlight is not as bright, so it's hard to tell a full test on the brightness or the contrast size, but you can just see the quality of the backlight there. The other thing I like is just the actual data you get from the workout analysis on the watch, but it's just obviously laid out in the app. They don't display the numbers in a way that is super fantastic. They're just in a bunch of little tiny boxes, but the recovery time, the training stress score, those are the more bedrock pieces. Like the training stress score flows into your training load over time, but the fact it considers the PTE just like an overall exertion from 0 to 5 for your aerobic fitness impact of the workout, and then your epoch, that would probably translate a little bit more to Garmin's training load type, or even to Polar's training load, even though it doesn't actually go anywhere. So you can see here in this workout, 4.5 PTE, so like impact on aerobic fitness relative to Garmin's 3.7, 4.3 PTE, Garmin's 4.0. Those were a couple of harder workouts. 3.7 on the PTE in the Suunto vertical versus 3.3 on the Garmin. So you're getting a lot of similarities for what you would get on a Garmin for the aerobic training effect from looking at that PTE number. So that makes that PTE number a valuable number. The epoch is actually useful. It could be useful, but it actually doesn't go anywhere, so it's actually not useful in its currency. The other thing I really like is their training load analysis. And you can get that a couple tabs. So like one tab over on the main landing page on the home page, you can see this productive training. It basically looks at the amount of intensity you're carrying over the last 7 days relative to the amount of intensity you've carried over a longer period of time. And it tracks if you're pushing your longer term average higher or not. So is your recent, you see 47, is your recent fatigue, or basically how much intensity you've been carrying on the body, higher than your longer term? That means you're pushing your fitness higher. That, I don't know why they show it as a negative number. That negative form means that I'm pushing my fitness higher, my long term, my body's ability to handle rigor. But this is probably one of the most simple and best, and you can make it for like years. You can look at like long periods of time to see your training if you wanted to look at over a long trend of time. And within your visual line of sight, you just look at the black line. The black line is your fitness level, which technically is your chronic training load, like your body's ability to handle load over a longer period of time, but still sort of translates to a fitness level. So the other thing you can see is on the bottom primary tabs, you see the analysis tab in the middle. You can see it, information there, mostly on this progress, where it's a little bit more clearly laid out, but it's basically the same charts. You can learn all about it. But this is one of the main training load analysis pieces of information on any of the watch carriers that I really think adds a lot of value. Okay, the other thing that's really impressive is the battery life. Now, these aren't going to be the same specs as you would have seen or what they mentioned is what they were capable of. But if you look at it with how you control the backlight, this is with sleep turned on, and within sleep turned on, this is with the blood oxygen tracking, which we'll talk about in the negatives section. But in simple terms, it's been getting me 14 days with medium backlight and no standby, which means it's like a dull, low level backlight at all times. So 14 days I think is fantastic, because the brightness of the medium brightness on this is twice the brightness of any other watch on the transflective side I've tested. If you turn it on low, and then you were to, you're getting more like 21 days. If you turn on low, and then you do add the standby. So the standby is sort of a dim backlight that comes on and stays on permanently all the time. You get 13 days. So low backlight with the standby on, you get 13. And then if you turn it on high like it's on now with the standby on, you get about 7. So still 7 days is a long period of time, but with the medium brightness, plenty, and it's 14 days, I feel like that's great. One impressive thing has been the coaching. Not that I like functionally use it, but if you go in the statistics tab, you go to the overview, it's the primary tab. It basically talks about what your trainings look like this week relative to past weeks. It talks about your sleep recovery and your overall progress. So it gives you a verbal and like written feedback. So that's great. But then you can also go down and you can see your training load. Now this is your training stress score. So this is like this isn't how much time you spent. This is actually your load, which is super helpful to be able to see a broad snapshot of like what your intensity level has been for the workouts. And that's what it's measuring. You can see your total volume into each of the heart rate zones, which I think is useful and would be a good metric to evaluate how much zone 2 you're putting in, but also how much zone 5 you're putting in compared to past weeks. And then your overall volume. Some of these things aren't as useful, anaerobic or anaerobic impact areas, but then a little summary, a little prettier version of what the training stress score, the training load analysis shows. It tells you where you stand on the pendulum or the spectrum of pushing your fitness higher, and then your overall progress, which is your fitness score, fitness level. So this is a great page. All right, one other minor thing is how it compares sleep and the resources relative to something like Garmin. Now, this might be going away, so this is a minor point, so this is a minor benefit, but it doesn't give a lot of detail, and we'll talk about the negative, but it gives you a sleep score. The sleep score does pretty much translate to what Garmin's sleep score looks like, although it's not always the same. So you see 63 was your quality. That's sort of like your sleep score, versus 60 on the Garmin, and then 51% quality. I really like that it fails you. It gives you bad scores. There are not many sleep score and analyst systems that give you like a 30, whereas this will do that as well as Garmin would do that. So it gives you low scores if it thinks you had low quality sleep, which I like. The other thing is it's tracking resources, so it looks like at the body battery. This has not been as great of an experience as Garmin provides, but it does at least track the trend lines. If you look at the white line relative to the graph that Suunto is providing, your green being your stress-free time, and then there's some yellow, there's some other gray in there, which is maybe stressful times. So you can look at the picture, and you can look at the picture. So you can see it's following a similar path that Garmin follows. And so it is similar. You don't get the same exact results in every single day, and it will be adjusted over time because they're going to drop the first beat contract. But just the fact that it is offering it now and will offer it for just at least the foreseeable future for now. That's worthwhile. So there you have it. There's a summary of things that I liked, from, fundamentally important to maybe more nuanced things. I really like the coaching. I like the training load analysis over time. I really just love the look of the watch, as well as it is incredibly bright for the amount of battery life. Those are impressive things. But what are the things that I didn't like or were a major or minor issue in testing this? Let's dive in. Obviously, I did a whole video on the heart rate inaccuracy for doing CrossFit or high intensity interval, but it's just not consistent. As you can see, these charts versus a chest strap, we have like major problems in some of the workouts. So like that, horrific. So not reliable. You need to connect it to a chest strap if you want to do any kind of intensity. And if you look at the results, it's basically got a comparison to a chest strap of 0.62, which is, very low, versus like a Coros, which is 0.83, or a Garmin, which is 0.90 if it's the lighter Garmin watches, 0.94 for the heavier Garmin watches. So the heart rate accuracy is actually an issue. You need to connect to a chest strap for intensity. All right, the next one up is actually from the design. So if you look up at the corner here, the way that it's shaped, because the arms bend down where it meets the band, it's got a point right here. And if I pull it back, you can see there's a red indentation. And a lot of times, even if I move and loosen it up, it'll work its way back down to pointing that little point right in the edge. And that's where it just sort of sits, driving against that bone. I wear watches on this wrist all the time, and this is the first time I've noticed a definitive discomfort. And it might be because of the design, because you can see that the arms bend downward more so than other watches. Like, so if you compare it to the Fenix 7X, this comes more straight across, whereas these arms point downwards. Same thing if you were to compare it to the Apex 2 Pro. The arms go sort of straight out the side with a minor bend down, but these arms actually come more definitively down, and there's this point here. So tragically, I think it's actually not something that's going to go away, just because of the design, because there's more angle downward, as well as a sharper point, sharper edge. Like if you were to compare it to, the Fenix 7X, if you look at the rounded edges on the 7X versus the pointed edge on the vertical. Okay, another major complaint is just the generic or general nature of all the data that you get. So the general nature of the resources, it's just got a graph. I'm holding my finger there. It doesn't actually give me any data points where I can move and track across time. If you look at the sleep, it gives you, like maybe that little tiny baby 51% quality is a good sleep score, but you can't see any details. You don't have all the sleep stages. You can't see your sleep stages across time. It's just so general. And then even when you look at these primary tabs where you go in to get information, to see sort of at a glance information, I just feel like it's not giving enough quality or depth of information. It's just all a little bit too general. Another major thing from that is that pulse ox is basically worthless as far as any information getting it from it. So you can see here in this bottom sleep, it says maximum 100%. I get that a lot. But boy, if I click on that, I don't see any data. And it took me forever to find any pulse ox data. So if I go into the sleep tab under the analysis page, I found one day where if you look down, wait for it, it had one measurement listed. I mean, what in the heck is that? Please don't say you offer pulse ox. Now you can obviously track it in a manual test. But it's not like if I go into any other day, I've got no pulse ox. Any other day, I don't see one of those red dots. I think I found it in 1 out of like 14 fields. Sorry, I'm going fast just because I want to see if we can find a red dot, another red dot. See, day after day, no pulse ox information, and I have it turned on. I don't know how many times it's tracking. I don't know if it's using a power source, but it definitely needs to be turned off and terminated for the rest of its life because it is worthless. It doesn't come through. Another major thing that I have an issue with is adjusting sleep because it is not available. So if I look in here and I say, okay, this has me going to bed, this top one has me going to bed at 1:31. Well, I didn't go to bed at 1:31. Number one, I can't see any stages. I can't see any movement patterns. I can't. But the worst thing is I can't adjust it. I can't make it say 12:30. If I click on it, there's no edit. It's always going to permanently say whatever it tracks, it's locked in for all time. And any watch is going to be inaccurate some nights where you want to give it an adjustment and say, no, I fell asleep at 12:30. Give me a little more credit, even if my quality or my sleep score stays the same. None of that's available. You cannot edit your sleep time. It's just going to track whatever it's going to track, and you're stuck with it. That makes no sense to me. Another thing that's really hard for me is, let's say you want to adjust some of your sports customization. You want to adjust your data pages for your workouts. You go into the watch mode, you go down into sport mode customization, and it gives you a shorter list of the things that are showing on the watch, and you can remove these. One of the frustrations I have is that it takes like 30 seconds to remove one of these. But if you go in to one of those tabs and you want to, add a new data page, look at a new data piece of information, and we're not going to look at the nuances. Look at that. I can't add another one. It limits to 3. If you're on something like running, it'll allow. Well, I'm not going to go into how to adjust it, but if you wanted to make edits to one of the data pages, you'd actually have to create a sport and reassign a running sport, where then you could change the data pages. And I think running has like 4 pages. The other thing I made a whole video about is the watch faces. So the actual watch faces available on this and how you change them. So in order to change one, and it's okay because there aren't any good ones. There's just this one. This is the only good one. But if you wanted to change it, there's like a bunch of steps. You got to go there, and then you got to scroll down to there, and then you can go through the process of picking it. But either way, you have to, like, 6 clicks in if you want to get to be able to just quickly change a watch face. And the fact that they have not added any new watch faces other than this one just makes it tragic, because it's a really bright screen. It's really great screen, in my opinion, for the transflectives that are out there, but you don't have any watch face selection. And even if you did, the process to access the watch face menu is hard to get to. The 2 other minor ones is that if you actually are going into, set the watch up and you turn your sleep settings on, you turn this sleep on, it's going to track your sleep tracking across that time. And it's also going to mirror your auto do not disturb, so you won't get text messages. But it doesn't turn the backlight off. It doesn't shut the backlight even wrist gesture down. I will get wrist gestures, in the middle of the night, and it doesn't really affect me, but it's just annoying that the sleep, the do not disturb, isn't tied to the wrist gesture or the backlight just being turned off. Like, you have to physically push a button to get the backlight to turn on. That's not there. The second thing that's a really sort of a minor problem, or it really is frustrating to me, is when you actually are in a workout, notifications still come in, and there's not a setting that I could find. Same thing with the backlight turning off at night. There's not a setting I could find to turn it off to where notifications don't. And if I get 10 to 12 notifications of all different types an hour, my watch is constantly buzzing and it's popping up. So it's affecting my ability just to focus on the workout. So that's another minor issue I ran into. All right, so what do I think? And finally, I'll give you sort of a quick summary of the 2 variant options, the titanium and solar versus the stainless steel. I definitely do not think that the titanium solar offers enough value at $210 more for the purchase price. I don't think you need that much battery life, and I don't think the titanium saves that much actual weight. It's like 14% lighter than this one. So I think that one just off the table. But what do I think in general about the product, the solution, especially when looking at the stainless steel model? And I think about those positive traits. When I think about the coaching aspect, or the seeing your training load over a period of time in your fitness development, when I think of just the overall look and feel, other than that one issue that I mentioned in the don't likes, as well as the clarity coupled with still awesome battery life, I think it is a competitive watch, but with the caveat of what else could you get for $630 in today's world? So what else is out there? So if we look at the Garmin Fenix 7, which is now marked down to $500 for the standard or $600 for the solar model, you're going to get all similar type specs, but just better and more advanced and more complete and more functional, but you would just not get a sapphire glass. If you look at the Coros Apex 2, Coros Apex 2 does offer sort of the similar map, similar specs, but it lacks the resources in the sleep score, but it's also $180 cheaper. So it lacks some of the wellness instruction or guidance, but it's $180 cheaper. And then you have the Polar Grit X Pro, which at $530 is $100 cheaper. And it has similar training and actually a little bit better sleep analysis. but it has a smaller screen, it has a little bit dimmer screen, and there's not any mapping capabilities. So that's how those compare. Other than, in simple, the Garmin is going to be superior in pretty much every category other than the quality of the glass on the display. It's just going to be a much more complete, much more customizable. But it's up to you whether you like the look of the Garmin Fenix 7 versus the Suunto Vertical. I definitely like the Suunto Vertical actually as a solution better than Coros because I feel like it's a more complete package on the wellness side, better look, brighter, battery life is, at least somewhat competitive. And it does, it is a little more expensive though. On the flip side, I like it probably a little bit better than the Polar Grid X Pro. Personally, I do like just the overall experience when using the brightness. So that is the summary for the Suunto Vertical. Those are the things I liked and didn't like, and just across the board, what I think as it sits in the open marketplace. Let me know what you think in the comments below. It's the Figure Hunter. Thanks so much for watching.